Good morning. Thank you for coming to this Canada semester presentation. I'm Chad Stebbins. We have tried to recreate the conditions of frigid Quebec for you this morning so that you'll feel at home and be able to really be immersed in a talk about Canadian maple syrup. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Colleen Duke, who is a Senior Foreign Policy and Diplomacy Services Officer at the Consulate General of Canada in Chicago. She's a longtime friend of Missouri Southern. When we did a Canada semester 15 years ago, she was instrumental in helping us plan for that one. She brought the Consul General with her to Joplin 15 years ago, and this week she's brought a team of fellow Canadian diplomats with her to Joplin. So her areas of focus include academic and cultural relations, public affairs, communications and digital media, agriculture policy, security and defense, and human rights issues. Prior to joining Global Affairs Canada, Colleen worked at a number of museums in Chicago and Washington, D.C. She has a bachelor's degree in art history and economics from the University of Chicago and an MBA from Northwestern University. So she's giving several presentations today. Let me mention another one coming up at 1 o'clock today over in Phelps Theater in the basement of the Billingsley Student Center on studying abroad in Canada. Her team will show you ways that you can spend a semester in Canada and get some funding for it. So, but we're going to focus on maple syrup and the theft of maple syrup today. So, Colleen, take it away.
Thank you, Chad. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm very glad I brought my red Buffalo Check Sugar Shack maple jacket because, man, the auditoriums are cold today. So thank you so much for coming. I am an American who works for the Canadian Consulate, which generally disappoints people. I've been doing it for a long time. And maple is actually, of course, I knew about maple syrup before I started the job. But the longer I worked at the consulate, I have this deep appreciation for maple syrup and the place of maple in Canadian culture and the economy. So I've never given this talk before, and I'm thrilled to have put it together for you guys. It was the easiest presentation out of all of them that we're doing this week. So I hope you enjoy this ride. Let's go. What is maple syrup? We do a program in Chicago at the Alliance Francaise, and we build a sugar shack, and we'll be talking more about sugar shack later down the line. And serve maple syrup and maple taffy and talk about the making of it. And people are like, oh, I'm trying to stay away from sugar. And it's like, well, it's not really sugar. So there's one ingredient in maple syrup, and that's tree sap from maple trees. The sap flows every spring when the day and night temperatures alternate between thawing and freezing. It's a natural phenomenon that is unique to Eastern North America. There are over 150 species of maple trees in the world, but there's only 4 that provide the maple sap that can be turned into syrup. So it's a really special thing. It's mainly sugar maples that create the sap that's turned into syrup. It's about 70% of it. Red maples are another 29%. And then the sap is just cooked down to make syrup. It's a very simple, natural process. And we'll get a little bit more into it before you hear about the Heist. So it's a natural sweetener, which is why when people are like, I try to stay away from sugar, this isn't like cane sugar or other processed sugars. There's no added chemicals in maple syrup. I call it tree juice at home. That's all it is water from trees. So it's naturally filtered. There's no GMOs, there's no preservatives. Maple syrup, when they do the chemical analysis on it, there's 100 nutritional compounds and vitamins and minerals that's actually good for you. Comparing maple syrup to refined sugar, white sugar, brown sugar, our bodies are better regulated to handle blood sugar that comes from maple syrup. The studies recently have revealed that your blood pressure drops, you lose some belly fat, and this all suggests that maple syrup is better for you than other refined sugars. And recently was named as a superfood, just like blueberries or kale, but this is a little bit more tasty than kale. So when you go out and have pancakes on a Sunday morning and they put syrup on the table, chances are, unless they say it's maple syrup, it's corn syrup. Mrs. Buttersworth, that we all know, that is primarily processed corn syrup. So they're very different. They taste very different. They do different things to your body and your health. So we always say to look for the real thing. It's become such a problem that the maple producers, they did it last year. I'll have to see if they do it again. And if they do, I'll send the link. They started fighting back. And the Canadian maple producers said, we understand that maple syrup sometimes costs a little bit more, and we don't think you should have to pay that. So you could like send in your restaurant receipt and they'd send you like the couple of bucks that you'd pay to get the good stuff. But always hold out for the good stuff because life is short. So the history of maple production. This goes way back to the indigenous people of North America. They have been tapping maple trees named kutan in indigenous language and making syrup for as long as people can remember. Sometime in between 1536 and 1542, the French explorer Jacques Cartier and his fellow explorers, as they were moving through eastern North America, were really intrigued by what they thought was a large walnut tree. And they cut it down, and it was a sugar maple in the spring. And after they cut it, sap just gushed out of the trunk. And they'd never seen anything like that before, because it just doesn't exist in Europe. And then tasting it, they in their journals, they compared it to a good wine. So if you taste just plain maple sap before it's cooked down, there's just a little bit of sweetness to it, but it's quite refreshing. And then many of the European explorers encountered First Nations people tapping trees, and from it they would make maple sugar and maple syrup. And the explorers had never seen anything like this before and were just in awe of it and sent some back to Europe. And by the 16th and 17th centuries, there were growing references in Europe to the export of maple sugar to France as sort of a culinary curiosity. And it's reported that France's King Louis XIV loved maple sugar candy. First Nations people would get the maple sap by using an axe to cut a 4-inch incision. You can see a little bit of it there. And then they'd insert a trowel-shaped piece of wood. And then the sap would flow from that into a birch bark bowl. And then they'd take it to cook it down. And French scientists at the time studied maple trees and the making of maple sugar, which was more popular in Europe, and human health. And then it was widely accepted that this was, in fact, a very nutritious food. And as it became more widely available to the European settlers that came in, they were calling it country sugar. Because of course you weren't getting white sugar or molasses. It was very difficult or very expensive to get refined sugars from the Caribbean, where a lot of it was being produced. It was a luxury in Europe. So when there was this local, easily obtainable sweetener available, people started using it. And so it was a country food. And eventually the preference for maple syrup became a preference for maple syrup. So the sugar is cooked down a little bit more. It's like sugar. Consistency of brown sugar. But people are more commonly, they adapted to using maple syrup. It was just easier to make and easier to use. And then by the 19th century, the old ways of tapping and harvesting changed. And instead of an axe, people were using a drill. Wood buckets were replaced by metal bins and receptacles, and an iron pot rather than the homemade wooden or birch bark ones. And then branch-covered shelters, which were used by the Native Americans, the First Nations people, and the original settlers, gave way to a shack made out of lumber, known as a sugar shack, to process the sugar in the woods. Now, the maple sweeteners became more popular with Europeans in the 19th century, but they were fairly uncommon and inexpensive. And for North American colonists, there was this ready source of sugar in the maple trees, as I mentioned. And this gave rise to the tradition and culture of sugar shacks in concentrated in the area that we now know as Quebec. Because there's a small tapping window in the spring where the temperatures rise above freezing during the day and below freezing at night, pulls the water up through the roots and through the tree so it can be tapped. The harvesters need to access many trees and constant harvesting of the sap. So that's why the sugar shacks came to be. They would build their processing facilities in the woods close to the trees because you're moving a lot of sap to be processed into maple syrup. And as a result, whole families would spend weeks at the sugar shack helping to collect the sap and then boil it down to either syrup or sugar. And communities would often, and still do today, come together and pool their resources and their labor to help each other out during sugaring season. And this communal effort allowed them to have some leisure time working in the woods rather than working all together. It's always easier when you work in a team. And because of that, and the community that was built around the sugar shacks, there was a whole culture that evolved around it as people stayed out here in the woods and processed their sugar. What's interesting about the sugar shacks is there's a whole subculture to it. There's special foods that are associated with the sugar shack. Sugar shacks still exist today, and you're going to see a tourism video, someone who visited a sugar shack during sugaring season. So there's foods that are commonly eaten at sugar shacks that came from colonial times all the way up today. They tend to be heavy. It's winter, it's cold, you're in the woods. I think you can sort of feel it in here today. And of course, you're using your maple syrup that you're making. So pancakes, which you may have guessed, but also a lot of baked beans. There is a split pea soup. It's not like the split pea soup that we have in the States. It's made from a yellow split pea, and the consistency is different, the taste is different, but you can put maple syrup into that and it gives a nice little punch. Again, heavy foods when you're in the country, a lot of sausages, tortilla, which is a traditional meat pie, and then maple taffy, which I'll get to in a minute. So besides the hard work in the woods and the great food, so you're hanging around, and of course there's entertainment, because what are you gonna do if you're not cooking down syrup? So there's always a lot of music and dancing, traditional songs, traditional dances, and you'll see a little bit of that in the video that I have. The sugar shack tradition is an integral part of Quebec history and culture, and continues today, and is a popular outing for locals, from people from the city, or for tourists that come up in early spring. And I don't need an excuse to go to Canada in winter, but some people may. And the sugar shacks are a unique part of Quebec culture. So I mentioned maple taffy. This graphic is actually maple taffy. So what is done, and it's kind of tricky. We did it in Chicago and it didn't turn out so great. So the maple sap is cooked down past the point that you think of syrup, and it's a little bit denser. And then it's poured on snow. And then you take like a popsicle stick and you roll it. And so it's soft and it's sweet, and you get the ice crystals in it. And they say it's mostly for the kids, but I'll say that when we've done it, I usually have like 3 or 4 and kind of overdo it. It's the product that it's made from is called tir, and it's a conversation when I have new Canadians that come to the Chicago area and we talk about doing the sugar shack, and they're like, "Oh, we'll just go get some tir." I'm like, "No one here knows what that is." It's like, we don't do that. That is very much a Canadian thing. So someone always has to bring some back when they come back after Christmas, because it's something that's readily available in the stores that we just don't do here. So the maple industry. The maple industry in Canada is huge. Canada makes 78% of the world's maple syrup, and of that, 92% comes from Quebec. Now, the balance comes from the States, and it's coming from a lot from Vermont, some from Wisconsin, some from Michigan, some from Minnesota, not much further west because you just don't have the tree stands. In 2024, so this past winter, I won't give you the metric measure of it, because like you, I'm American like you, so liters are tough. But in 2024, 12.4 million gallons of maple syrup was produced in Canada, and this is a 5-year low. In 2022, 2 years prior, it was 21 million gallons, so not quite twice as much, but a significant amount. And you might be wondering why, but you might also know the answer. There have been unseasonably warm winters thanks to climate change. And if you don't get that freezing and thawing and you don't get enough moisture, the trees just don't produce enough sap. I have a colleague who is with our Quebec office. I'm going to bring her in towards the end. Jeanne has property outside of Quebec City. She taps her own trees. I know she had a very good winter this past season. I'll ask her to speak about that later. I have a handful of trees in Southwest Michigan. We had a very dry winter and a very warm winter, and we try to follow local indigenous knowledge, and we did not tap our trees because we thought it was too much stress on them. So it is very local, depending on how your winter conditions go. In 2022, to give you an idea of the maple industry impact in Canada on an economic level, maple products added over $1 billion to the Canadian economy. So this is serious. So making the maple syrup. Like I said, it's a pretty straightforward process, but it is labor intensive. So the days have to be above freezing, nights below freezing, and the sap only flows for a couple of weeks. It just stops at a point, or actually the sap just is a unusual color, and that's when you know you're done. You drill into a tree, you place a tap, it's called a spile, and it's kind of like a metal or a plastic straw with a hook on it. You hang a bucket on that hook, and then you can use a tube to help direct the sap into your bucket or another collection vessel. The picture on the far right, you see that that spile has a hook where you can put the bucket directly on it. Again, close to where I have my trees in Southwest Michigan, there are a bunch of, honestly, they're hippies from the 70s, and they bought this piece of land and they tap their trees, and they've been doing this for a few decades. They try to be as resourceful and reuse as many products as possible. So when we went for a tour of their property, they use old 1-gallon milk jugs and a piece of wire and hook it up with a tube and just keep reusing those, which I thought was very inventive because we have a pile of buckets in our garage and it takes up a lot of room. So the sap flows during the day, and it's one drip at a time. So every 30 seconds you get a drip. So you collect that syrup, or that sap, to cook it down to syrup, and it takes 40 gallons of sap to get 1 gallon of syrup. Yeah, it's a lot of work, and that's why it's expensive. So it takes a lot of resources and a lot of time. So the sap is collected, and it's boiled down in an evaporator, and it has to be monitored because it's very easy to go from nearly syrup to garbage, and then it's trashed. And this is hours of work, and so much moisture comes off it. Some people will tap a few trees for their own use, like I do. I believe Jean has a small stand of trees. Some people have large maple stands and tap hundreds or thousands of trees, and they'll put together a tube system to move the sap, because you can't hit 1,000 trees, especially on a day where the sap is flowing. You just don't have enough people or time, so they'll set up these tube systems through the woods to try to direct it to a central area. And I'm gonna flip. So this should be a video of a visit to the sugar shack. Hopefully it will work.
Legalizing sports betting will generate tens of millions of dollars every year for our classrooms.
So I talked to a psychic, and I want to tell you guys about it.
We are transferring.
Can we skip the ad?
You will hear.
Thank you.
Legalizing sports betting will generate
not.
tens of millions of dollars every year.
Not
for
endorsed
our
by the Canadian
classrooms.
government.
Wix. One platform, any website. Unlimited creation.
Legalizing sports betting will generate tens
I think
of
we're gonna have to let
millions of
this one
dollars
roll.
every year for our classrooms.
I'm so excited today. I get to go to Cabana Sucre for the first time in my life. I've been saving it, and today I'm going to get the real deal, the big experience, somewhere incredibly authentic.
To find a real Cabana Sucre, you've got to hit the road. I'm heading west, just outside of Rigaud, to the one and only La Sucrerie de la Montagne.
Pierre!
Welcome to my neck of the woods.
Oh man, literally.
Hey.
Run by Pierre Fauché and his son, Stéphane, La Sucrerie is an official Quebec heritage site. For over 33 years now, La Sucrerie has recreated the traditional Cabana Sucre experience for everybody.
This is a 300-year-old maple grove. It's fantastic. It's noble. It's the emblem of Canada.
How close is this to the old way? It looks pretty authentic to me.
That's close enough to go back probably 1800s.
So you're telling me you actually go around and gather all of this
Yeah, we
sap,
sure
tree
do.
by tree.
It's not as hard as you think it is. We tap the tree like this. The abrasion bit. It only goes in this deep. It's like this. You tap it in there with my 100-year-old hammer.
Oh man, you've taken a lot of lives with that bad boy.
No, not one. I just use it to tap the tree. And this,
Put on a little hook there.
this is to stop the snow or the rain to mix with the maple water.
I kind of want you to show me how you make it and how you heat all this.
Sounds good.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the sugar shack. This is the evaporator. It takes 40 liters of sap for 1 liter syrup.
40 liters of sap for 1 liter of...
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Why do you have bacon hanging here?
And when the sap is boiling, it can overflow.
Oh.
So we take this bacon and we just touch it, and the fat makes it go down.
Wow.
It's like a little bit. You're making spaghetti.
It's exactly...
You put olive oil in it.
That's right. That's my technique. Who told you? Have you been... Are you seeing my mother?
Yeah.
That's...
This is maple glazed bacon.
Are we gonna eat some of this later?
My gosh, this is. This one we say for us.
What is this for?
That's to make the maple taffy. We put it over the snow. It sticks on the snow, and then it makes like a real nice candy.
Stéphane, Pierre's son, grew up at La Sucrerie, and no one knows taffy like this guy.
This is our maple taffy setup.
Okay.
This is our trough where we serve the maple taffy. It's concentrated maple syrup, so that it's like caramel. We pour on the snow and roll it up with a popsicle stick to make a lollipop.
You have excellent linesmanship here.
Thank you.
It's really thick.
What you want is just bring it together, roll it up.
All right.
You can have the full thing if you want.
Mine is like a Frankenstein popsicle stick. I'm terrible at this, man. It's like...
Take a little bit.
Oh, all right. Moment of truth, everybody. Eat your heart out, Montreal. Enjoy
Eat
breakfast.
fast, because you're getting it out of your glove. That's part of the fun, too.
You eat this every day, Stéphane?
Pretty much.
Let me ask something. Dental fees.
They come out with their office and
They come right to you. Amazing. I want to go eat.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
Follow the
Let's do
sound
it.
of
I'll
the
keep
music.
my stick. Well, a big part of coming to the country and experiencing the Cabane à Sucre authentic experience is eating the food. And Stéphane's going to show us some of the things we're going to try.
These are all my grandmother's recipes.
These are ancient recipes.
Yeah, these are our homemade baked beans and garlic, parsley, and pepper mashed potatoes. Tourtière, meat pie, excellent with our homemade fruit ketchup.
So this is how you serve your eggs?
Yes.
No scrambled eggs, no cheap stuff here.
No, souffle omelet is very good.
Amazing.
And then here we've got some back bacon with a bit of maple syrup here.
So this is back bacon. This is only served at Cabane à Sucre, from what I understand.
I'm gonna try this. All right, cheers.
All right. Cheers. Cheers. That's pretty unbelievable. Mm-hmm. That is pretty unbelievable. You don't eat this every day.
Just a piece a day.
Just a piece a day. That's how you stay so strong. Shin, amazing. Thank you again.
I don't know if it's all the sugar, but it's hard not to get caught up in the vibe of this place. Pierre and Stéphane make such an effort to make sure to keep things authentic around here. For my last maple treat before I hit the road, Pierre's promised me a whiff of something new. What is this? Is this perfume?
This is a parfum d'érable. It is the aroma, the fragrance of the Canadian maple forest.
Do you think it's gotten it really? Is it really in there? Oh.
Well, I certainly smell delicious, Pierre.
It's dangerous.
It's not safe.
You can be attacked.
I'm gonna easily be attacked.
And let me tell you, I've been a victim.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Pierre, I gotta say, this has been an amazing experience.
Wow,
Thank
I'm
you
glad
so
you-
much.
I'm
You make
glad.
my first time so special.
All right, that gives you a sense of Sugar Shack life. Now, that brings us up to the heist, which is why I know you're all here. So, strategic reserves are created to protect a country or organizations from shortages of critical products. The United States has a strategic petroleum reserve that's accessed in times of need. The Quebec maple producers have created a strategic maple syrup reserve. A group of Quebec maple producers came together in 1966 to form the Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers. There are annual quotas, they oversee production and sale of the syrup. And as I mentioned, maple syrup production is highly dependent on the weather. And when conditions are good, there's a surplus. When conditions are bad, there's a shortage. So by creating this federation, they work with all the producers to bring the maple syrup together, and then they can stabilize the market. So it ensures that the producers will get a good price for their product, and that supply is maintained. And then that is a picture of the reserve itself. It's wholly owned by this Maple Syrup Federation. And so when the maple syrup is sold from the stockpile, that's when the producers get paid. Now, not all maple producers are fans of this group, and there's arguments that it goes against the free market, or they've been called a maple cartel. Producers are fined for trading outside of the Federation, and there are 3 warehouses that hold the maple syrup reserve. Combined capacity of 216,000 barrels of maple syrup, which would fill the equivalent of 53 Olympic-sized swimming pools of syrup. So what happened? One of the greatest heists in Canadian history was the maple syrup heist, worth about $18 million. So the warehouses are inspected once a year, and in 2021, Inspector Michel Gavreau came to one of the warehouses to take an inventory, and he was climbing up on some of the barrels and fell against one and was expecting to hit a 600-pound barrel filled with maple syrup, but the one that he hit, he found was empty. And then he opened some more of the barrels and found that they were either empty or filled with water. It was also reported that some of the barrels were dirty. You saw those beautiful white barrels, it's immaculate. So the dirty barrels were an indicator that something was wrong. And then some of the barrels were also rusty, which is unusual because maple syrup does not oxidize. And the Strategic Maple Reserve does not have, or did not have security cameras. They might now. So there's no video evidence, but the Sûreté de Québec, so the Quebec Provincial Police, were called in and partnered with the Federation to figure out what happened. And it took 2 months to inspect all these barrels. And they found that 9,500 barrels were stolen, which is 427,000 gallons of maple syrup. It was 60% of the reserve, worth about $18 million. And then the Sûreté determined that it had to be an inside job, just by the way the barrels were accessed, the way they were filled, the way they were replaced. But they did know that there were some people who weren't really happy with the whole idea of the Federation and having to sell your maple syrup through them. So through about a year of investigation, they identified a couple of people who had been in trouble with the Federation in the past for selling their maple syrup outside of the structure, and determined, and I won't go into the details because there is a Netflix show I can recommend to you that will drill down into it. The trucks came in and the thieves came in and used trucks to take the barrels out. They took them to a sugar shack where they siphoned off the maple syrup, refilled the barrels of water, and then returned them. And as it kept going and no one caught them and nothing happened, they got a little lazy. And so some of them they just put back empty. And then the maple syrup was taken from Quebec over the border to New Brunswick and was stolen or sold to someone who sold it from New Brunswick. There is no federation that controls maple syrup production and sale there. It was also crossed the international line into Vermont, which I guess makes it an international heist. And police later recovered hundreds of barrels of the syrup from the New Brunswick exporter, and that's when this whole scheme started to fall apart. So this guy, Richard Valliere, who was accused of being the ringleader and he was arrested along with 17 other people in late 2012. He had a reputation for being what's called a barrel roller, which is someone who found ways around these controls in the supply management system. He learned about the strategic reserve from a friend of his whose spouse owned the warehouse, and that person testified that he had talked to Valliere and gave him access to the warehouse. So Valliere apparently admitted to participating in a maple syrup black market for a decade before this theft, and has been previously pursued by the Federation. His co-conspirators said that their actions weren't theft because they didn't agree with the supply management systems and it was unfair to producers. So Valliere was eventually sentenced to nearly 8 years in prison for his involvement in the Great Maple Heist and was fined $9 million. Now, a documentary has been made about it. There's lots of YouTube stories available. After I created this presentation, I found there's a Netflix series called Dirty Money, and they have a whole episode on the Maple Heist, which will give, it offers some interviews with some of these people who do not agree to the quote-unquote Maple Cartel, and goes in depth into the investigation, and it's absolutely worth 45 minutes of your time. Checking my time. It's a lot of maple syrup. And I know what you're thinking, because I'm an American too. It's like, how much maple syrup can you possibly consume? So it's more than just pancakes. And depending on the province, Canadians consume maple syrup anywhere from 3 times a month to a high in Quebec of nearly 8 times a month. And maple products can be used in many different ways, in both sweet and savory, which I find very interesting. Sweet, it's a sugar substitute. It's good for you. You can use it as an alternate to simple syrup that you might use to sweeten beverages. But you can also use it in salad dressings and sauces. My personal favorite is it's a maple baked chicken, so it's a little mustard and a little maple over chicken. You throw it in the oven, it's fantastic. I added in pudding chamour, which is a very traditional Quebec recipe. It's kind of like a maple cake, but kind of loose. It's lovely. I would recommend, if you're maple curious, maplefromcanada.com has great recipes, including a lot of the ones up here. At this point, I want to flip to my colleague Jeanne, who I believe is on Zoom, to see if she has anything to add to my maple show.
Good job, Colleen. Can you
Thank
hear me?
you.
Can you see me? No, you can't see me.
Can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I actually learned a lot. So thanks for the presentation. So I'm Jeanne. Yes, I work for the Quebec office in Chicago. So I'm based in Chicago, but actually I'm from Quebec City, more specifically from Lévis. So it's a Quebec City suburb. So I have a house more in the countryside of Quebec, and we have like 10 or 12 big maple trees in our backyard. And you know, my husband is French, so that was kind of his dream to have his own sugar shack. And unfortunately, we don't have any sugar shack in our family, because in Quebec, most of the families, especially if like you come from more rural area, you usually have a sugar shack in your family, but which I don't. So he decided that he wanted to make his own maple syrup. So since we have like many maple trees in our yard, he decided to tap our trees about like, I think 4 or 5 years ago. And he had no expectation at all. He started from scratch. So he went to an antique shop and bought metal beams and tapped our trees, and ended up with, at the end of the season, I think 12 liters of maple syrup. So, which was a very good production and good maple syrup, I would say. But the thing is, like, it was a very good like result. We were very happy, but it takes so much time. But hopefully it was during COVID, so we were working from home, so it could like boil the maple water during the day, and I think he would go to bed at midnight because it takes so much time to end up with maple syrup. But that was a very good experience, and maple syrup was very good. And that said, like, it's actually very easy to make your own maple syrup if you have maple trees around you, and you don't need any, like, you only need like a drill and bins and time and energy. So we start boiling the water on like a big boiler outside of the house, and then we finish it like on the stove in the house. And was smelling very good in the house, of course. And I just read actually that October 20th is going to be the first Maple National Day in Canada, Colleen. So we're going to have to celebrate it in some ways.
Oh, we need to plan some sort of an event.
Yes. And personally, I think we consume about 2 gallons of maple syrup per year. Like, so it's true that in Quebec, people use it like in many different ways. I replace sugar by maple syrup. If I bake a cake, I put maple syrup in dressing for a salad. So it's pretty versatile. You can use it everywhere. It's very good. Thanks, Colleen.
Thank you. And at that, I'm going to flip. By the way, Jean, we can see you on the screen, just so you know. I have a thank you slide that I think I'm stuck on. Oh, whoop. And there we go. Thank you. If we can pull Jean back up, and we can take questions.
Hey, I was just wondering if it's possible to like grow the maple trees here in Missouri that could make the syrup.
That's a very good question. I am not sure. Not knowing your climate down in this part of Missouri, I don't know if you get that freezing and thawing action that you really need. I know because I went off the deep end with like maple syrup and research, and that's just my nature. There are different kinds of trees that you can boil down their sap for syrup. Maple is the most common. Some people do birch syrup. But the key part of that is the freezing and thawing process that just happens in the spring, because that's what's pulling the water up through the tree. Jean, do you want to jump in on that?
I don't think it will be possible. Maybe you could grow like some sort of maple trees in Missouri, but like temperature is too warm, I think. No. I'm gonna have to go to Quebec. Sorry. Or Michigan.
Or Michigan or Wisconsin or
Yes.
Vermont. But Quebec is, the Saudi Arabia of maple syrup. We have another question.
Does it hurt the trees when you like take all the syrup or sap out of it?
John, you want to take that one?
I mean, I don't think so. I think the answer is no. But like the scientific explanation, I'm not sure about it. But I'm pretty sure no, it doesn't hurt the tree. But yes.
From the reading that I've done, it does not hurt the tree. I mean, these trees are pretty big. The ones that we tap in our yard, they're about 2 feet across. And you don't put like 20 taps on them. We might put 2 or 3 on a tree that big. You don't tap your smaller ones. But it's important, as I've learned from some indigenous groups in the Great Lakes area, to pay attention to that weather, because the environment can stress them out if they have a tough winter or a very dry winter. This past winter we didn't take from the trees because we didn't get any snow really, and I wanted to just kind of give them a break. We found at our Michigan place, there's cross sections of trees that were in the garage because there was a lot of stuff left behind, and you could see actually where someone had tapped the trees in the past and then where the tree like grew out. So it heals over where you tap them. Another question.
Pass Mike
down. What value would you place on a tree that produced good maple syrup?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
What value, how much monetary value would you place on a tree that has good production of maple syrup?
Good question. It's because you tap so many. I mean, it's 40 gallons to 1. So it's a lot of trees that it takes to make it. what I'm seeing, you saw one of my slides, it had the traditional, like the French language can of maple syrup. That is very standard in Canada. Jean, how much would you pay for one of those cans of maple syrup at home?
Around $6.
Yeah.
Canadian.
So it's $6 for that, and you figure out how much sap needs to go into that. So it would vary by tree. It varies by region. We pay more than that for maple syrup here, so kind of have to do the math. I don't know if I could put like a price tag on a tree, because all trees are different too, and we're talking sugar maples as well as red maples.
And
How
it
much-
depends on the.
How much do the trees cost?
Like to buy a baby tree?
Yeah.
I have no idea. I don't know, to buy a tree. We both work in offices, so it's like.
I don't know, but I know that it will also depend on the price of gas and oil, like because it changed from year to year. So
It's a good question, and we'll look into that. I think we can do one more, and then I have treats for you.
Hello. So I was thinking about the winter elements in it, and I was thinking, is maple syrup flammable? And if it is, have you ever come into a situation where there's been like wildfires that affect production?
Wildfires would affect production. It's not flammable. I mean, it's water. So you cook it down, it's just concentrated water and sugar. But of course, any wildfires would impact the health of a forest. Jean, do you have anything to add to that?
I would say that most of the maple syrup productions, forests are not necessarily located where like there are wildfires. So I don't think it. No.
So far, so good. I need to bring this to an end, so I want to thank you for being here. I also thought, as Jean and I were talking about this presentation, that it would be cruel to talk to you about maple syrup for 45 minutes and not offer you a little taste of maple. So thanks to Jean, I have a bunch of maple lollipops for you, so please come on up to the front and grab one or two and head off to your day with a little taste of maple. Thanks so much.
Thank you.